Hey guys, welcome to You Fix It Garage, where it's always my goal to help you save money by doing things yourself. Today I'm out in the shop and I'm going to be rebuilding the front shocks the front forks and the rear shock on this Tenere 700. If you're watching this video, you're probably considering some upgrades to the suspension on your bike, and the sky is the limit when it comes to suspensions on these things. It can get very expensive really fast. I went with RaceTech for the parts for this build, and there's a couple of reasons why I went with them. One, RaceTech makes the gold valve kits, which is somewhat industry standard. A lot of the suspension pros use the gold valve kits, so they have a good reputation. Two, they'll sell direct to consumers, so I could order the parts straight from them. And three, they have what they call a DVS or digital valve search on their website, where when you order the gold valve kits from them, you go on their site, you enter your bike, year, make, model, your rider weight, and your riding style, and it gives you a custom setup for your suspension, the valve stack, and even all the way down to the clicker adjustments for your suspension, for your riding style and weight. So in the end, I end up with pretty much a custom suspension that I can do myself. Now, I will say this right up front, I am not a suspension expert. I'm just a guy that likes to ride motorcycles. What's going on inside of these forks and that rear shock is a mystery to a lot of people, including myself up until I did this. But the benefit of it is now I understand how everything works inside of my forks and inside of that rear shock, and it's not such a mystery anymore. I know what's going on, so if I have a problem, I kind of understand where that problem is. So I ordered all the parts from RaceTech. I'm in at about $1,100 to revalve and respring both the front forks and the rear shock. Now that's pretty expensive, but if I were to send it off to a shop, it would be more than that. RaceTech charges $250 for the forks and $250 for the rear shock, plus shipping both ways, so about 600 bucks. So I would have been in at another 600 bucks if I would have sent it off, and it still would be a mystery to me what's going on inside here. So if you're considering doing this, please don't rely on this video as your sole resource. Look at the RaceTech instructions, look at other information that's out there on the internet, and then make your own mind up as to whether or not this is a job you want to tackle. I will say that if you have reservations about it, you're not sure about it, you're probably better off sending your suspension to somebody else to have it done. But if you're willing to dive into it, I'm willing to show you how I did mine. So the first step is remove your front forks. This video is going to be the forks only. I'm going to do another video on the rear shock. We're going to go over to the bench and I'm going to show you what you're dealing with to take that fork apart, and then we're going to spend the bulk of the time on the valve rebuild, because that is the most intimidating part of this job. So here we go. All right, let's talk about tools you're going to need for this job. To remove your forks, and for most of the job, it's just common hand tools that most shops have. Other than that, you're going to need a micrometer that will measure millimeters. The digital ones are pretty easy to get. You're going to need some way to set the fluid level in your shocks. I just made this custom syringe and cut this off to length so that when I stuck it down in there, I could set my fluid level. You can also buy one of these. Rocky Mountain ATV sells one made by Tusk, their brand, that's about 15 bucks. So that's pretty cheap. You're going to need a inch-pound torque wrench. And then finally, you're going to need some way to remove the mid-valve from inside of your shock tube. And you'll see in the video what I'm talking about with these. I started out using this piece of 3/4 inch square tubing. It works pretty well, but I got to a point where I needed to disassemble the mid-valve once it was already out. And it's torqued together pretty well. And so what I ended up doing is I took a 1-inch piece of square tubing and I cut these notches in it so that this meshed with the top of that mid-valve a little bit better, and gave me where I could put a lot more torque on it. So 1-inch piece of square tubing, these notches are cut in it, and it will fit down in there, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So those are all the tools you're going to need. All right, let's talk about instructions to go along with this video. So when you order your gold valve kits and all your parts from RaceTech, they're going to send some instructions in the kits. Those instructions are going to have the access codes for that DVS, that digital valve search. And once you enter that information in, it's going to give you this printout that has who you are, what your bike is, what your rider weight is, and then your valve stack shim setup for your compression valve, for your rebound valve, and then it has all kinds of other good information. It tells you what your torque should be for your compression nut. It even tells you how many clicks for your rebound adjuster, how many clicks for your compression adjuster, what your front sag should be, fork preload, all kinds of good information, and it gives you that same information for your rear shock if you order the gold valve kit for it. So when you enter this in, print this off because it's kind of a one and done. Once you enter it, you can't go back to it. So print this sheet off so you have it, and then it was going to give you links to other instructions. So I've got the instructions here for rebuilding the compression gold valve. I've got the instructions here for rebuilding the rebound gold valve. All of that stuff is available on RaceTech's website. Once you get the shock out and you get ready to start disassembling it, you're going to need a 19 millimeter, either a socket, an end wrench, or just a crescent wrench to take this loose. And I recommend breaking the torque on it while this is still in the bike so that you can hold on to this. You're going to need a 17 millimeter end wrench for sure, because this is on here and it holds the spring assembly, and you're going to have a 19 on top or your crescent wrench and a 17 down here to break these loose from each other. On the bottom, this is right here is your valve assembly, and it screws in the bottom of your shock. There's your little clicker adjustment that everybody's used to down there, and that is a number 14 Allen. So you're going to need a number 14 Allen. I would recommend a number 14 Allen socket because it's much easier to take this loose with an impact than it is to try and do it by hand. And then the way this thing goes together, this piece right here is down in your shock tube, runs all the way down to the bottom, and this comes up from the bottom and screws into it. And so you can break it loose or break the torque on it with an impact, but then the whole assembly is going to spin when you try and loosen it the rest of the way to take this out. There's a specialty tool that goes down in this little recess right here that has 4 lugs that go into that, and then you can take this loose. But that tool is about $100, and for a one-time job or a job you're not going to do very often, you probably don't want to spend $100 on a tool. So what you can do is do like I did. This is a piece of 3/4 inch square tubing, and I saw this on the internet. I didn't come up with this, but once you take your spring guide off and you've run this little plunger right here back down in, then you can take that piece of 3/4 inch tubing and slide down, basically down in your shock this way over this, and it will mesh in there with those teeth, and it will allow you to take this loose. This piece right here has an O-ring around it, and it's not going to just come out of the end on its own. There's a couple ways. You can either put your socket back down in here and kind of bind it a little bit and try and pull it out, or I just take a wooden dowel rod, run it down in the shock this way, and just push and kind of tap it out. Here's the valve, and if you'll notice from the factory, this to retain this nut on here, they peen the end and it flares out the end of the threads. And the instructions say to take a file and file all of that down flat with the head of the nut, and you can definitely do that. But there's not a lot of threads here to begin with. And so all I'm going to do, I'm just going to take my Allen socket right there and put on it. This is a 10 millimeter boxed in wrench, and it really doesn't take much to take that loose. Oops, say that. It doesn't take much to take that loose, even if you don't unpeen that or file it, I guess I should say. All right, there we are, disassembled and ready for the gold valve kit to go back on it. Okay, now for the fun part. This is my compression valve out of the bottom of the shock. I've cleaned it up and I'm ready to put it back together. So in your RaceTech kit that you get, you're going to have a compression. You're going to have 2 compression valves, and you're going to have 2 rebound valves. I already rebuilt one shock, that's why I only have one of each right now. But in this little compression packet right here, there's going to be the gold valve and all of the little bits that go in the stack, and then you're going to have all of the washers, the spacers that go in there, the shims I guess is what they call them, that go in there that make up your compression stack. What I'm going to be building is this stack right here. So there's the shaft, there's that spacer which is right there, then we start the shim stack. Now you may have to put some spacers in right above this to make this nut work out, and I'll go over that here in just a minute. But it goes spacers, then your shim stack, then the gold valve, then you have a washer right here that has a bigger hole in it than these other washers, and that's so that this spring and this little valve will work. So this washer came out of this compression kit. I just want to show you how I measured these. So I told you that this starts at the gold valve. So these 4 shims right here, they're 0.15 by 17. So here's the gold valve. So starting at the gold valve, if we measure the thickness, right, there's 0.15, and then if we measure the width, that's 0.17. There we go, 0.17. So I've got 4 of those, and then the next thing on there is 1/10 by 11. So that's that one right there. And then it just goes on down, 1/10 by 17, and then 1/10 by 15, and then on down. And I got it all laid out. First thing that goes on is that spacer, and then I just start building my shim stack. So over there I've got them still all laid out in order, and I'm just picking them up in order and I'm putting them on top. Now here's the gold valve, and the gold valve goes with this little, this side is flat. See how that side's flat around the middle of it, and this side is recessed. So there's the flat side. We're going to put it down. Then the next thing that goes on is this washer with the bigger hole, and you'll notice it has a little slop, like it doesn't sit flat, and that's because this has got to be able to move up and down. So when you put this on here, then the spring goes on, and then this little cap that has a hole in it, like a little bleed valve hole in it, goes on above that. So here I've got that cap pushed on, and I've got tension pushed down on this spring, and this washer should be able to move freely. See how that can move? But if you look, I'm out of threads on the bottom of my threads. So if I run the nut on here, it's not going to tighten this up. So I've got to put some spacers, some additional washers down here as spacers. So the way I'm going to accomplish that, I'm just going to take a screwdriver, and I'm going to stick a screwdriver right here, and I'm just going to slide everything off in the order that I put it on. So there's my shim stack still in place. I don't have to worry about those getting out of order. I can set those aside, and then I can take my valve, put this on here, and then I've already got, this is my old shim stack that came off of it, and these are bigger than the smallest diameter shim in the stack. So I'm going to put those on here as my spacers, and then I'll slide it all back together. You can see I've got threads all the way out, and that's enough that I can take this nut and put this nut on there with some thread locker, and it'll be locked in place pretty good. Here's my valve assembled. You can see There's the base plate. It's really hard to see because they're not real thick, but there's some spacer shims that I put in there. Then my valve stack, then the gold valve, then the check plate right here, and make sure that it's moving freely, the spring, then sleeve washer right there, and then the nut. I torqued this to 30 inch-pounds. Verify that torque for yourself, and I used blue Loctite on here. So the only other thing that I need to do to this before I reassemble it, it comes with this little O-ring, and that O-ring goes right there around the gold valve. So I need to put that O-ring on there, and this valve will be ready to go back in the fork. Here's where things got a little sketchy for me when I started researching this project, is how to get the rebound valve out of this tube. And what I've determined is that this little collar right here unscrews. So it's torqued in there pretty heavily, and I don't know if they've used some Loctite or what they've used, but this needs to unscrew from this, and you can't just do it by hand. There's a special tool that holds this so you don't scratch it. And then in the end of this, there's some holes right there. You can stick a screwdriver in. So I came up with a way to do that. I don't have that special tool, and you know, do this at your own risk, but it worked pretty well for me on the first one, so I'm going to do on the second one. What I'm going to do, I'm going to pull this out just a little bit so that's not down inside there. I'm going to put some heat right here, and then I'm going to put a screwdriver down here. I'm going to stick this on this pipe. This is the pipe that I used when I unscrewed it out of the fork. So that's going to hold it right there from turning, and then I'm going to break it loose. See if I can video this process for you. So all I'm using right here, if you can see on this end, is a screwdriver through these holes. I'll go ahead and put that in place. I've run this out just a little bit. Take the torch. We're going to apply a good bit of heat. And that's just oil smoking off, shock oil, so don't be too concerned with that. And now that I got it heated up a little bit, there we go. Ooh, don't grab a hold of it while it's hot. Takes a little bit of force, but the two of them will unscrew. And there's my rebound valve right there. So I'm going to file that end off just like we did on the other stuff. So we need to file, ooh, that spring's hot. We need to file the top of this off a little bit, take this nut off, and then the rebound valve will come off there. We're going to rebuild that rebound valve based on what we've got in our schematic right here. So nut, base plate, then the valve stack goes actually on top of this, of the rebound valve. Then you've got your check plate, spring, and the sleeve washer right there. So what I've got to do is build this valve stack right there based off of my digital valve search sheet, and they give me the instructions right there for rebound and what the shim stack should be, so I need to measure those out and get it all laid out. Took a little trial and error to get that set up right, but I've got this is moving properly. I torqued the nut to 30 inch-pounds, and I put blue Loctite on it because it's a lock nut, but there's really not enough threads once you adjust it so that this will tighten down to work with it. So it's got blue Loctite on it, and that is set up per the instructions. With the rebound valve reassembled, I've got some blue Loctite on my threads, and I'm just going to put this right back up in there. I'm going to hand tighten it, and then I've got my piece of pipe in the vise and my screwdriver. See if I can back this out where you can see. Again, we'll just run that up in there. Use that pipe to lock it in place. Screwdriver over here, right there. And I'm just going to tighten the piss out of it. All right, once you get that mid valve back together, the reassembly process is pretty straightforward. It's covered in your service manual. If you have questions when you're doing this, the service manual is a good reference. Page 459 through 467. It's going to give you all the torque specs for putting everything back together, and it's going to show you a schematic diagram that shows all the internal parts. But your compression valve, when it goes back up in there and it screws to that mid valve, the torque on it is going to be 41 foot-pounds. Don't put it back together with an impact. You're liable to strip something. So put you a little Loctite on there, a little thread locker, and screw it down to 41 foot-pounds. That's going to get your mid valve reinstalled. Once you have that, you're going to fill it with oil. Before you put your spring in, before you put the spring guide or anything in, you're going to fill the shock with oil, pump it a few times, try and get the air bubbles out, let it sit for at least 10 minutes for the air to come out, and then you're going to fill it to a level between 85 and 110 millimeters from the top of the shock. The documentation that I got from RaceTech said 110 millimeters. The documentation that's in the service manual shows 85 millimeters. So there's a range there, I guess. You choose which one you do. Putting your forks back in here, your torque spec on the triple clamp is going to be 15 foot-pounds. Your torque spec on the cap, going from the cap to the top of your mid-valve rod, is going to be 11 foot-pounds between that rod and jam nut that's in there, 11 foot-pounds. And then once you get your forks back in here and you're going to finally tighten the cap to your fork, that's 22 foot-pounds. So just refer to that service manual. Like I said, it's got those torque specs in there. The only other thing that I'll mention is that I did replace my springs, and the spring that RaceTech sent me was shorter than the factory spring, and RaceTech sends you a piece of pipe that you have to cut a certain length to make up that difference, and some washers that go inside the shock. It's a little bit of an involved process, not too hard. They actually send really good instructions on how to do it, and then how to measure the preload on your spring before you put everything back together. But if you order new springs, just be aware that's another process you're going to have to do that I didn't cover in this video just because the video is getting too long. Maybe I'll do another one on it later on. So I hope this helped you out with your forks. If it did, check out my next video. It's going to be on the rear shock. We're going to rebuild it. And if these videos help you, please hit that like button, subscribe, and always ride safe out there. Thank you guys for watching.